here you will see what is Polygon Law of Vectors or Polygon Law of Forces. Force is a vector, right? So consider a rigid body, right, subjected to a lot of forces like this. Force F1 in the horizontal direction, force F2 in the vertical direction, force F3 inclined, force F4 inclined, force F5 it is inclined, right? So 5 forces are acting on the rigid body. We can combine these 5 forces and we can make single resultant force. That is, the 5 forces can be combined and made into a single resultant force, right? So that this single resultant force produces the same effect as that produced by all these 5 forces, right? Now we are going to find out the single resultant force, right? So here what we can do is, in this Polygon Law of Vectors, we can form a polygon like this, or we can assume that the forces are acting along the sides of a polygon, right? We can say that the forces are acting along the sides of a polygon, right? So this is force F1, right? So this is the head and this is the tail. Beginning point is the tail, end point is the head of the force F1, which is a vector, right? Force is a vector. Then this is F2, this is the tail, this is head F2, and F3, this is the tail, this is the head, and F4, this is the tail, this is the head, F5, this is the tail, this is the head. So 5 sides, 5 forces F1, F2, F3, F4, F5 form the 5 sides of a polygon, 5, right? Now the resultant force is R. This resultant force R is the closing side of the polygon. So here up to this 5 forces are formed and this is the closing side. So the resultant force is acting along the closing side of a polygon, taken in the opposite direction. That is, the resultant force starts from the beginning of the first force and ends at the end of the last force. Here F5 is the last force and here F1 is the first force. Therefore the resultant force starts from the tail of the first force and ends at the head of the last force in this direction. This is the resultant force, right? Therefore the resultant force forms the closing side of the polygon, right? Right. So this one resultant force is equivalent to the combination of all these forces. It can be said like that, right? This resultant force produces the same effect as that produced by the system of forces, right? So this is called Polygon Law of Vectors or Polygon Law of Forces. So we can add this. R vector is the resultant force, F1 vector, that is force F1, F2 vector force F2, plus F3 vector force F3, plus F4 vector force F4, plus F5 vector force F5. So this is the resultant force, right? So this resultant force produces the same effect, or this is the resultant vector which produces the same effect as that produced by the system of vectors or the system of forces on the rigid body. This is called Polygon Law of Vectors.